It's primary season in Illinois. This year, Congressional District 13 has a new shape. It starts west in East St. Louis, winds northeast through the capital of Springfield, on to Decatur, and ends in Champaign. Across from the Mississippi River and famous Gateway Arch sit East St. Louis, where churchgoers demand politicians keep their promises.
If you decided that you were going to bring development here, don't just talk about it, be about it.
While in Champaign, University of Illinois students are concerned about the Supreme Court overturning legalized abortion in the U.S.
I think if we could focus on just making, obviously, like healthcare more accessible and safer for everybody, it would be good.
4 Republican newcomers want to represent Central Illinois in Congress. Decatur business owner Regan Deering, aerospace engineer Matt Hausman, former political journalist Terry Martin, and former federal prosecutor Jesse Rising. Illinois Public Media, WAND News, and the League of Women Voters of Champaign County present a debate with the Republican candidates of Illinois Congressional District 13.
Good evening. I'm Sean Streety, co-anchor of WAND News at 5, 6, and 10. Want to thank our co-sponsors, Illinois Public Media, which is hosting this debate in their studios. In a moment, you'll hear from the candidates, Regan Deering, Matt Hausman, Terry Martin, and Jesse Rising. But first, the format for tonight's debate. Each candidate will have a minute-long opening and closing statement. Once we start asking questions, a candidate will have a minute and a half to answer. The other 3 candidates will have 30 seconds each to respond. Then we'll move on to the next question. All of the campaigns agreed to this format. The League of Women Voters of Champaign County is timing this debate. None of the candidates have seen tonight's questions. Joining me asking the questions tonight, Karen Eisert, reporter for WAND News, and Brian Mackey, host of the 21st Talk Show with Illinois Public Media. Thank you. Well, we'll start with a minute-long opening statements now in alphabetical order of last names. Regan Deering, you're first.
Good evening. I'm Regan Deering. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm running for Congress in the 13th Congressional District because I'm afraid for the future of my children and yours. Our voters across Central Illinois, as well as this country, are looking for real-world experience and common sense to bring their issues to Washington. I didn't go looking for a political career, but I have found myself well prepared. I'm a mother, a small business owner, a former educator, and an advocate for my community. And I think that it's time that we have representatives that are more connected to what our voters are looking to have in their homes and in their businesses and in their families. So I appreciate the opportunity tonight to be here and give you a little sense into what I stand for and what I fight for and how I'm going to bring about change to Washington as a new kind of representative in the Illinois 13th.
Matt Hausman, your opening statement.
Thank you, and thank you for tuning in. I've been fortunate. I was able to live out my American dream, growing up on the family farm here in Champaign County and going to work in the space industry. But I realized that not everyone gets opportunities like that, so I wanted to give back. I taught high school for 4 years at a low-income charter school. I went around the world for a year and a half volunteering on different projects. I've been running a nonprofit here in Champaign for 3 years, feeding hungry kids all across Champaign County. And I've been serving on our Champaign County Mental Health Board. This is what drives me to serve. And I want to serve in Congress because self-serving politicians use fear and outrage and divisiveness to win elections and then don't do anything for us. So I want to go to Congress and bring people together so that we can work for solutions for everyday Americans so that they can live out their American dream.
And next, Terry Martin.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks to the League of Women Voters. I'll give you a brief thumbnail of my career. I've been covering politics for 30 years. I've followed it for much longer. I was in both Washington, worked at WAND News, and I've been the executive director of the Illinois Channel for the last 20 years. I've learned that government is nothing more than a system of systems. We have a transportation system, a law enforcement system, a medical system. And what we have right now are a bunch of broken systems. I didn't plan on running for Congress, but I just couldn't stand idly by while the American middle class is being crushed under bad policy decisions being made largely out of Washington that is causing the cost of everything to go up. I look forward to talking with you about the issues that matter to you this evening, and thanks again for WILL covering this campaign.
And finally, Jesse Rising.
Thank you, Sean. I'm Jesse Rising, and my family has been in Decatur at the heart of our district for almost 200 years. And over the past 40 years, the failed policies of the establishment politicians have been decimating communities like ours. As a public school kid, I was at the epicenter of these challenges. But I was fortunate to be recruited to play football at Yale University. That was a massive culture shock, but it made me realize that America truly is the land of opportunity. So I wanted to give back in the most meaningful way that I could, and that led me to Marine Corps Officer Candidate School. Unfortunately, a life-changing injury left me partially paralyzed and ended that dream, so I had to recover and find other ways to serve. So I went to Afghanistan as a civilian, used the money I earned there to start the Warrior Scholar Project to serve our veterans, and served as a federal criminal prosecutor. And then I saw that the Mike Madigan machine gerrymandered our district to favor their hand-picked candidate. So I'm running to put our values before the values of the woke Washington insiders and retire Nancy Pelosi.
All right, thank you, candidates, for your opening statements. We now turn to our first question from our panel. We start with Brian Mackey.
Thank you, Sean. This week, families in Uvalde, Texas are burying their loved ones. The shooter was 18 years old. He couldn't buy a handgun because of federal law, but he legally bought 2 AR-15 style rifles. Jesse Rising, President Biden just called for raising the age for obtaining AR-15s and other military-style weapons. Would you support that?
Well, first of all, my heart and my deepest condolences go out to the victims and their families of these recent tragic and senseless acts of violence in Buffalo and in Texas. And if we look back to when these mass shootings really began to become a big problem in this country with Columbine in the 90s, what we've also had since that time is a corresponding increase in a mental health crisis. So if we look at deaths of despair, for example, from the 1990s, we've had increasing suicides, we've had increasing deaths related to alcoholism and drug overdose deaths. So what we're facing right now in this country is a crisis of purpose and a crisis of meaning because our communities don't rally around each other like they used to. We don't have the same participation in civic institutions, and we don't have the same church attendance that we used to. And of course, the pandemic only exacerbated these issues regarding the isolation. So people are turning to the dark corners of the internet to find solutions to their problems rather than turning to their communities.
But but I'm sorry to interrupt, would you support raising the age to buy AR-15s?
And with these, with respect to that question in particular, which is where I was getting with the rise in these mass shootings, the issue in Texas, actually, 18-year-olds have been able to buy these types of weapons for many, many decades. So this corresponding increase in mass shootings has nothing to do with the age at which individuals have been able to purchase firearms.
Jesse, I'll have to stop you there and turn to Regan Deering for a 30-second response.
Well, I agree with the absolute devastation that all of our families across this country are feeling as we have multiple victims of gun violence throughout this country, seems like every day now. I certainly am a supporter of the Second Amendment and will defend our individual rights to defend our families and our properties. I think that there does need to be common sense legislation by getting the right people around the table and talking about things like gun safety and education about gun ownership, and that's what I'll advocate for in Congress.
Regan Deering, thank you. Matt Hausman, you have 30 seconds to respond.
I echo the thoughts about that our hearts go out to those in Texas. We as Republicans need to admit that there is a problem with guns being too easily accessible for dangerous hands. I support the Second Amendment. I oppose gun bans, but I do support things like raising the minimum age for purchasing firearms, red flag laws, background checks. These are things that are common sense solutions that can get bipartisan support.
And Terry Martin, you have 30 seconds to respond.
You know, I'm often struck, and I tell my friends that when you pass a law, it doesn't stop an action. We have a law against people entering the country illegally. We have a law against illegal use of drugs. We tried to pass a law back 100 years ago against drinking alcohol. It didn't stop the action. We can pass a law on gun control. We have to know that's not going to be the solution that is being sought. There are many other things, including treating mental health, that need to be addressed.
Thank you, candidates. Time is up for those responses. We turn now to our next question from our panel, and that is from Karen Eisert. Karen?
Yes. So our next question is for Terry Martin. Terry, we had a viewer had a question on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So it passed the U.S. House last year, and it aims to restore power to the federal government to prevent discriminatory changes in voting laws. So Ann Prisland of Urbana, she wants to know, how would you have voted, and specifically why?
I think I've voted against that because so many of the bills in Congress are not what they are labeled, and they are not actually going to do what they are sold as doing. We need much reform to be made in our elections. Election integrity is critical. We have Hillary Clinton saying the election was stolen in 2016. We have Stacey Abrams saying the governorship was stolen when she ran in Georgia last time. In fact, Donald Trump saying the election was stolen was the first time a Republican candidate, to my memory, has said an election has been stolen. It's normally been the Democratic Party making that claim, as they said in Bush v. Gore. What we need to do is look at the functionality at our states. The federal government can say there are some minimum standards, but I would say we need to look at what went wrong in the 2020 election. Ballots should not be sent out wholesale. Ballots should only be sent out to people who request them. We have new technology coming along, blockchain technology, that offers the opportunity of being able to track every single ballot where it goes. We shouldn't have examples that we saw with the film 2,000 Mules. If you haven't seen that, I would suggest watching that. We see, without maybe not a smoking gun, but we see plenty of smoke, that there were many issues that where these elections were not being held transparently at the state level.
Jesse Rising, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, so there should never be doubt about the results of an election in the world's greatest democracy. And federalizing our elections would only exacerbate that distrust that Americans have today in our democratic processes. And with respect to the way that voting works in this country is we have a system of dual sovereignty where our states control elections. And I would encourage the state of Illinois to impose voter ID laws, because that's a common sense solution to improve the integrity of our elections that many Americans support.
All right, I will turn next to Regan Deering for a 30-second response.
I would not be in favor as a legislator for H.R. 1. I think that the states have control of the voting process and it needs to remain there. I would absolutely be in favor of a universal voter ID, and I think that we need to have boundaries where our voters are feeling comfortable with their vote, that they have integrity in their vote, and that we need to make sure that we count every legal vote every election cycle.
All right, and finally, Matt Hausman, 30 seconds.
I would also oppose similar legislation at a federal level to echo these are supposed to be handled at the state. Now, we need integrity. We need elections to have voting easy and secure. So I support requirements like voter ID, limits on ballot harvesting, but I would not support any efforts to restrict voting hours, polling places, or things like that, because we need to make sure we're protecting the right to vote along with the integrity of the vote.
Thank you, candidates. All right, on to our next question. We do have a question that is on video. It's about agriculture, which of course is a big industry in this 13th Congressional District. Let's hear from this person from Cerro Gordo.
Yes, this is Todd Henricks from Cerro Gordo, Illinois. My question is about the 13th Congressional District being primarily an agricultural district. How are we going to handle harvest this fall for our farmers with our fuel prices continuing to skyrocket? That's going to be devastating on the farmers when they go to the fields to harvest crops this fall. And also, the rising fuel prices are very detrimental to the input costs for our 2023 crop. How are we going to change and make this more equitable for our farmers?
So, Regan Deering, with fuel prices and production prices up, the question to Regan Deering is, how will you help farmers?
Obviously, the Illinois 13th is the home of agriculture, and I am always going to be a supporter of our farming community. It seems really hard to be in that position as they're facing so many challenges. The question asked about rising input costs. Fuel and fertilizer are making it more and more challenging for our farmers to do their job and get product to market, we've got to be able to take a look at some of our trade agreements and the market availability for getting that product out. They have crumbling infrastructure. We talked about locks and dams and rail and roadways. And I think that we need to take the opportunity to come together and support our farmers. We've got the Farm Bill next year coming up as Congress will address that issue. And we need good people at the table. I'd be honored as someone from Central Illinois to sit on the Ag Committee and be able to take a look at how we can decrease regulations. We have struggling farmers getting access to broadband. And so I think that we need to take some of those farmers and some of those right in the fields and take them to the table to be able to talk about legislation that's going to make it easier for them to battle rising costs, supply chain issues, infrastructure, and broadband.
Matt Hausman, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Actually, this is a very personal issue for me, coming from a family farm and still working with that family farm. Input costs have tripled when talking about fertilizer, as was mentioned, fuel costs. This is why we need better energy policies. We need an all of the above energy solution. The Farm Bill is coming up, and that's going to be big for our 13th district. Part of that with the Farm Bill, a big portion of that is nutrition programs. So I can come to that with multiple perspectives to help with bipartisan solutions.
Terry Martin, 30 seconds to respond.
You know, every viewer watching this show and everyone out there knows that the high fuel prices are impacting every single family, every single business. It's impacting our schools, our retailers, everyone. So it's not just the farmers, and we sympathize with them. I agree that the 2023 crop is going to be very problematic. What we need to do is unleash the oil producers to get the oil flowing again and stop these high energy prices.
And Jesse Rising, 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, so my family's owned various farmland throughout Central Illinois over the generations, and my great-grandfather was a tenant farmer, so I understand how vital our farmers are to the health, prosperity, and even the national security of our nation. So we need to give them the financial security to put food on their own tables in addition to ours, and that means robust crop insurance. That means lifting the ban on E15 so they can take full advantage of the ethanol market, and also getting these inflation and fuel costs under control because they hurt the farmers as much as anyone.
All right, time is up, candidates. Thank you for your responses. Our next question comes from Karen Iser on our panel tonight.
Yes. Okay, so this question is for Matt Hausman. So Matt, parts of central and western Illinois are forecasted to see the greatest increase in the number of extreme heat days in the entire country. So what would you do at Congress? You know, what would you do there to combat these extreme weather changes?
Okay, so thank you for that question. This is something Republicans have seeded this issue for 20 years. We have denied climate change even though we knew it was happening. Oil companies knew it was happening. We need to accept that and realize that heavy-handed regulations from the government are not the way to do it. The Green New Deal is not the solution. We need innovative solutions. That's how we can solve climate change. Because when you look at the innovation, if we can unleash the American economy to find solutions using things like cover crops and ethanol, these kinds of solutions are the way forward. And that's
all right, that completes your response. Terry Martin, 30 seconds to respond.
We may be running for Congress, but we're not running for ruler of the universe. The powers of Congress to control the weather are nil. What we can do is understand that we can transition to new forms of energy, but you can't do it overnight. We didn't go from the Wright brothers to sending explorers on Mars in 5 years. The problem with the Biden administration is they're trying to rush to go to technology that isn't proven, isn't available, and isn't ready. And that's why we're having these explosive energy prices.
Jesse Rising, 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, we do need to take a look at our carbon emissions, but we also have to understand that other countries are emitting carbon virtually at will. We also have to be realistic about any transition to renewable energies and not dismantle the oil and gas industry in the meantime, as President Biden has called for. A too aggressive timeline has now resulted in the utility companies are now projecting that we're going to have rolling blackouts this summer because we're overly reliant on unreliable renewable energy for our electricity now.
And finally, Regan Deering, 30 seconds.
So in fact, hot days of summer are coming here in Illinois, and we have got to be able to come home and flip on our air conditioning. And we are going to be able to combat what's happening when we're talking about brownouts right now. We live in the greatest country in the world, and we cannot be having brownouts. We've got Democrats continually changing the goal line for renewable energies. I'm all in favor, but we can't take our coal mines and our fossil fuels offline in advance of trying to meet these unrealistic goals.
Time is exhausted. Our next question from the panel is from Brian Mackey.
And I'm going to ask this question first to Terry Martin, but I'd like all of you to respond to a very straightforward pair of questions. Terry, who won the 2020 presidential election, and was it free and fair?
Well, Joe Biden is in the White House. He's signing the bills. He's the president of the United States.
Did he legitimately win the election?
I don't think we can say that because there's been no legitimate investigation. I don't know if you've looked at 2,000 Mules, which has brought up significant issues. We've had secretaries of state of Ohio and Pennsylvania and other states who were changing election laws in September when they did not have the authority to make those changes.
Well, we've also
Only
had
the legislature can make those changes.
President Trump's own attorney general, though, William Barr, has said the Justice Department found no evidence of widespread fraud that could change the election. On what evidence are you basing your reservations, I guess?
I'm basing it on that there was a lot of things that we see that are, unproven. No one, I don't remember the Attorney General Barr, with all due respect, I think he's a good man, having the time to have done any kind of a thorough investigation. And that is still going on as of today in Arizona, in other states. I think we need to have a thorough examination of that. Election integrity is critical. No matter who wins, we must have the voters understand that their vote counted and that who is ever in office is an expression of the will of the people.
Jesse Rising, 30 seconds to respond to that question as posed from Brian.
Yeah, it's easy to understand why people's confidence has been so destroyed in our democratic processes, because we have big tech monopolies and the liberal media that are censoring stories in the lead up to the 2020 election, putting their thumbs on the scale that way. We have gerrymandering. The 13th district has been drawn specifically to favor a hand-picked candidate. We have Democrats who don't believe in common sense solutions to improve confidence in our elections, like voter ID, and we have ballot harvesting. So we have to implement measures to improve the integrity of our elections on all these fronts.
Did Joe Biden win, and was it free and fair?
Well, Joe Biden is legitimately the worst president that we've had since Jimmy Carter, so I can't say that.
Regan Deering, 30 seconds.
So the 2020 election was unlike any I've ever voted in my lifetime. I know that we now have the Biden administration controlling the White House and decimating our middle-class families. We do have loss of voter confidence in whether or not we had a free and fair election in 2020. So I think this year, now more than ever, it's imperative that we look at these elections coming up in November, and we absolutely need to take back control of this House as Republicans so that we can undo the damage that's being done by this administration every single day.
And Matt Hausman.
I'm sorry, I just do want to follow up, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but did Joe Biden win, and was it a free and fair election?
Joe Biden was approved by Congress to be serving as our president today, but he is doing the worst job that I've ever seen.
Matt Hausman, 30 seconds.
Yes, Joe Biden won, and yes, it was free and fair, as was said by his own, by Trump's own election security official. I understand why people might not like that, and I admire Terry Martin for being willing to stand up for that. But the fact is, it's gone through court 60 times. We need to move past that.
Thank you. Moving on to our next question of the evening. This is to Jesse Rising. I will ask it. The Federal Reserve has a dual mandate, balancing inflation and unemployment. Inflation could be stopped by driving the American economy into recession. How do you weigh these trade-offs?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, President Biden is the worst president that we've had since Jimmy Carter. What we have right now is 8.3% inflation and negative 1.5% GDP growth. Now that's eerily reminiscent of the stagflation that we had under Jimmy Carter that decimated our economy, and it took the economic policies of Ronald Reagan to lift us out of that mess. And as for the Fed, they have to, of course, rein in this inflation that we now have, and that's going to create a further drag on our economy as the Fed continues to raise interest rates. So the situation is most likely only going to get worse from here. So we have to, on the fiscal side, we have to cut this reckless federal spending that's fueling the inflation. We also have to bring good paying jobs back to central and southern Illinois, not only to enrich our people, but also so that we're not so dependent on foreign countries for our basic needs, and that we don't have vulnerabilities when there are global supply chain disruptions as we're having right now, with a situation where we have too much money chasing too few goods because the government has been recklessly spending endless trillions of dollars that we don't have, and we don't have the supply that we need to provide our needs. So once we resolve those demand and supply issues, we can get this inflation under control.
Just a quick follow-up, Jesse. It's not a uniquely American situation, inflation. Can you explain why it's around the globe?
It is a uniquely American problem because we had, during the COVID pandemic, we had $1.9 trillion in COVID stimulus that only about 9% of that went towards actually addressing COVID. The remaining 91% went towards things like 4-star hotels and ski resorts. So that's overstimulating demand. And again, having too much demand, too much money, chasing too few goods is fueling this out of control inflation.
Regan Deering, you have 30 seconds to respond to the question is posed.
Well, record high inflation is a tax on all of our families, and I think that we need to take the opportunity to elect good, responsible leaders who can come to the table and make good decisions for our working families. We cannot continue to work our way towards a recession this fall. It's terrifying for families who are trying to balance their own budgets, which is asked of us when we go to pay our taxes in April. And we can't just keep printing money like this is monopoly and letting our elected officials spend until there is no more.
Matt Hausman, 30 seconds to respond on the inflation question.
I'm glad you brought up the dual mandate of the Fed, because that is something that is unique to America. Other central banks only focus on inflation, and we need to look into cutting that unemployment mandate away from the Fed. As was mentioned, we need to get spending under control. I support legislation that would include or would require inflation analysis for any spending bill. We need common sense solutions to get this inflation under control.
And Terry Martin, 30 seconds to respond.
Sean, I pride myself in being financially literate. I have been an investor for over 40 years in the market. Right now, I think Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, he and the governors have done a horrible job. I was warning about inflation 2 years ago, that they should have been not keeping these artificially low rates. Now we're paying the price. What we need to do, again, is open the energy market to produce more energy, because oil and the price of oil is the common denominator pushing every other price up.
We're out of time. Appreciate all of you candidates sticking with the format tonight. We've come to the end now already of the first half of our debate. In the next half hour, we'll ask the Republican candidates in the 13th Congressional District about abortion rights and racial justice. And we'll ask more of your questions as well. We'll be right back after this.
Every day is a blessing. He hit the window twice with the gun. I just punched it. I heard a gunshot. I'm thinking, I gotta survive.
Science is the rigorous pursuit of knowledge.
There's a deeper mystery here
We've been asking for millennia, what is life? What is consciousness?
दलित औरतों का पत्रकार के रूप में कोई सोच भी नहीं सकता। हम एक आईना भी थे और बने रहेंगे।
The kids who come here are competing in a world that is very high achieving.
And it's tangible in some of those classes. You know, you can feel how worried people are about college.
Still out there searching, looking for myself, I guess. We'll see where that takes me.
This summer,
it's coming. You're passionate about flavor and you respect your heritage.
Delicious.
No one imagined a fall as graphic as the fall of the Boleyn family.
Thank you, Pacific Ocean. That's my boo right there.
Everything you love this summer on PBS and the PBS app.
Studios of Illinois Public Media on the campus of the University of Illinois. Welcome back to the 13th Congressional District Republican primary debate. Good evening. I'm Sean Streety, co-anchor of WAND News at 5, 6, and 10. Joining me in asking questions tonight, Karen Eisert, reporter at WAND News, and Brian Mackey, host of the 21st Talk Show at Illinois Public Media. Tonight with Regan Deering, Matt Hausman, Terry Martin, and Jesse Rising, all with us tonight. 4 Republican newcomers hoping to represent the newly drawn 13th Congressional District. All right, our next question tonight comes from Karen Eisert.
All right, so this question is for Matt Hausman. So Matt, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, he said Congress could someday vote to outlaw abortions nationwide. Would you support a federal nationwide ban on abortions, or would you support exceptions for rape, incest, and the health of a woman?
So I am strongly pro-life. I would support some exceptions, like for the health of the mother, but we need to find bipartisan solutions here. I know abortion seems like a binary issue that you're either for or against, you're either pro-life or pro-choice, but we can find ways to lower the demand for abortion. If you look at the countries with the lowest abortion rate, those are countries that have easy access to contraception and strong support systems. Those are the kinds of solutions we need in this country. If we are truly pro-life, we need to make sure that we're supporting mothers and that we are trying to reduce the incidence of unplanned pregnancies.
All right. Terry Martin, you have 30 seconds to respond.
I am a strongly pro-life. I've been endorsed by Illinois Family Action. I have 4 sisters, 2 of them are nuns, so you can kind of understand the family background I came from. I am very sympathetic to people that find themselves in an unwanted pregnancy, but we must have some standards, and we cannot just be taking the life of children in the womb willy-nilly, as the Democratic Party now wants to do up until the time of birth. I would take the exception of rape and incest
Terry,
as an
I'm sorry.
exception.
Your time has expired for that 30 seconds response, but I will turn now to Jesse Rising.
Yes, I'm proudly pro-life, and how we view the sanctity of life says a lot about us as a society. I have the support and endorsement of the head of the Springfield Pro-Life Agency, and I proudly will support pro-life policies as your congressman. Illinois has some of the most radical abortion laws in the country. My Democratic opponent, Nikki Budzinski, worked for and is endorsed by Planned Parenthood, which supports late-term abortions provided at taxpayer expense for virtually any reason. So this is what we're up against this fall.
And Regan Deering, 30 seconds for your response.
Personally, I'm forever grateful to have been given the chance at life and adopted by a supportive family at just a few days old. I also have 3 wonderful children myself, so as a candidate, I will continue to support the sanctity of life, but I also do think we need to spend our federal tax dollars not on abortion services, but on supporting women and young families in crisis that may be facing an unplanned pregnancy. I know many of my friends who are desperate to have adoption in their life, and so I support funding for those costs as well.
All right, thank you for your responses. Our next question comes from Brian Mackey tonight.
For many families, childcare is hard to find and way too expensive. The system in America has been described as in crisis. Regan Deering, begin with you. What would you do to make childcare more affordable and accessible for families in the 13th district?
Well, as the only mother candidate here on the panel, I can definitely speak to the necessity of childcare. We have got women back in the workforce. I'd like to see them continue to return after the COVID pandemic and being able to support them as they go back to work. We need to be able to offer incentives to our employers to help offset those costs for childcare. We know that women are doing great work and we need to be able to support their families back at home. As far as the accessibility of childcare, I was just reading about new legislation that allows overnight care for our EMS and our first responders. And I think that's an excellent solution to be able to offer them the ability to have the safety and security knowing that their babies are taken care of when they're on the front lines. So I do think that at the federal level, we can look for ways to bring those mothers to the table, those employers to the table, and legislators can get a firsthand look at some of the challenges that are being placed on their families when they are in the workforce. We have a lot of two-working families in our district, and so childcare is an absolute must. And I think that we, as Congressmen and women, need to be doing a better job at finding good solutions.
All right, I'll turn to Matt Hausman for a 30-second response.
Well, I do not have children. I have nephews and I have many friends, and child care costs is a huge issue that is brought up to me. We can help this out by helping cut regulations and allowing people who want to open and offer child care support, make it easier for them. This is also something where making our immigration system more efficient and H-1B visas can help lower the cost for child care by having more of a workforce for those services.
Terry Martin, 30 seconds for your response.
Brian, thanks for the question. I think it's very important. I remember when I had 3 boys right in a row, and back around 1990, my wife at the time, we were spending $15,000 a year in childcare, a phenomenal amount of money, so I really emphasize. And I remember thinking at the time, there are any number of people that drive to work. We ought to have some tax policies so that you can bring your child to work and have at the workplace child care facilities or at a hospital. There's any number of answers that can be addressed.
All right, thank you. Turning to Jesse Rising, 30 seconds for you to respond.
Yeah, so first of all, we need to strengthen our economy because a rising tide lifts all boats. And as a public school kid from our district, I saw the consequences of broken families. Unfortunately, too many of my friends ended up with really tragic consequences. And a lot of those consequences were the product of not having a father at home and not having any strong role models in their lives. So we need to implement policies that incentivize parents to be involved in the upbringing and care of their children.
Candidates, thank you for your responses. Now we turn to another video question. And this one deals with infrastructure, and it comes from Deborah Liu of Urbana.
Hello, my name is Deborah Liu, and I'm recording from Urbana, Illinois. This question is for both the Republican and Democratic candidates. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration just issued a report showing that deaths from traffic crashes increased by 10% between 2020 and 2021. Over 42,000 individuals died on U.S. roads last year. Here's my question. As my representative in Congress, what will you do to reduce these numbers, protect my safety, and protect the lives of regular citizens just trying to get around?
I'll direct that question to Jesse Rising. In terms of traffic deaths that are way up, how you reduce those numbers?
Yeah, every death is tragic. And I'm someone who believes that there is a limited role for the federal government, but things like infrastructure, roads, bridges, highways, the government does have a role. And we can stimulate our economy through those means and also provide a better life for the people of our district. But ultimately, what we need to be focusing on is the core functions of government, like those infrastructure projects, and not some of these other expansive social welfare programs that often get labeled as human infrastructure. I support real infrastructure, so we need to get the government back to those core functions that it's supposed to be doing, because the federal government is now spending, with President Biden's latest proposal, about 30% of our GDP. 100 years ago, that was about 4%. So we now have this overly expansive, administrative, bureaucratic state. So I would like to focus on reining in some of those things, because when the government expands, liberty contracts. So we have to get the government back to its rightful place.
Regan Deering, 30 seconds to respond.
Well, I hear your concern, and I know that there are a lot of ways that we should be talking about decreasing the number of traffic crashes. First of all, we need to take a look at distracted driving and a better education system for our young people who seem to be unable to step away from their phones even while they're driving a very large vehicle. I think that we need to make sure we have fully funded sheriff departments and state polices so that they can continue to monitor on-highway traffic and make sure that those deaths are limited. And we also need to make sure that our infrastructure is in fact building roads.
All right. Matt Hausman, 30 seconds to respond.
So first of all, hopefully some analysis has shown that those increase in traffic deaths are related to the pandemic and people driving faster, but hoping is not enough. So we need better infrastructure. We need better law enforcement, or more law enforcement on the roads. We also need to look as technology is moving forward, and we have things like self-driving cars potentially down the road. We need to make sure the government is working hand in hand with industry for these innovative solutions, but that they're going to be safe for all of us.
And Terry Martin.
Thanks for the question. In fact, I just had a good friend from my neighborhood was killed in a car accident back in March. So it's terribly shocking when that happens. He was only 38. As Matt just said, technology, Tesla and others are working on the self-driving cars. We know the preponderance of those traffic accidents are either from drunk driving or from people falling asleep. In both cases, technology would address that. But we also need to have infrastructure, which is concrete and steel, a real infrastructure bill to keep our highways up to speed.
All right, thank you, candidates. Our next question is from our panel, and that is from Brian Mackey.
Thank you, Sean. The 13th Congressional District, where we are today, has seen its share of racial violence, including riots in Springfield in 1908 and East St. Louis in 1917, in which white mobs killed dozens of their black neighbors. Terry Martin, what should Illinois school children be taught about America's history of slavery and lynchings and racism and discrimination?
I think you tell them the truth. You teach history. You don't go out of your way to teach them that America was founded on racism and that white people are all white supremacists. We don't go out of our way to divide the nation. That's too much of what the Democrats are doing. They always want to pigeonhole every citizen. I don't look at people as being a black American or an Asian American or a white American. We're all Americans. America works. It works better when we work together. Let's start working together. I think the world has changed tremendously in the time that I have grown up. I remember the 1960s. I remember how racism was out front and center. It's not that way anymore. We have made tremendous strides. And I think in the teaching, we ought to have hopefully the families raising people with good common decency to treat everyone with respect. And the laws should follow. We should not have laws that are dividing us even further according to the race that we are. I think these proposals to have compensation for slavery, I can't think of the term I'm looking for, these are divisive. This is not the kind of thing that we want to be engaged in. Let's all work together. And when you look at the people that are now serving in government of all races, this is a positive reflection of the United States offering opportunity to everyone.
And Jesse Rising, 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, in the public schools I went to in our district, we had roughly equal numbers of black and white kids, and we all struggled together, inside or outside the classroom, or inside or outside of the athletic arena. Of course, we must always teach the facts of our history, but what we must not do is indoctrinate our children to believe that they're either a victim or an oppressor based on the color of their skin. These toxic ideologies are tearing at the fabric of our nation and risk causing an entire generation of Americans to stop believing in themselves and in their country.
Regan Deering, 30 seconds.
Well, it's never been more evident that our public government schools are failing our children of all races. And if we're going to get back to the basics of teaching things like history and that we can learn from, we better focus on reading and math as well. Otherwise, we are not giving our public school students the opportunity that they need to find success in this country and be able to move themselves ahead. We do not need to be labeling children and giving extra reasons for them not to find success right here. We need to support our families at home. We need to get back to church, and we need to have loving thy neighbor.
Matt Hausman, 30 seconds.
We definitely need to teach some of the more negative aspects of our history and come to terms with that. But that does not mean teaching victimhood. I actually taught in a primarily Latino school, and I did not let any kind of a victim mentality take root. I made sure to encourage our children and empower them. One of their senior projects, they had to go out and get involved in their community, and you could just see the change in their eyes that they knew they had a voice.
Thank you, candidates, for your responses to that question. That leads me to our next question, which I will ask, which kind of dovetails what we've been talking about. And I'll address this to Matt Hausman. Do you support the concept of reparations to the descendants of American slaves?
No, and reparations was the term Terry was looking for, I believe. So no, I do not support reparations because especially 160 years now on, the logistics of trying to do that would be nearly impossible. I do support looking at ways that we can address those concerns of inequity, looking at redlining and that impact on building wealth. The fact that even for a white high school dropout has more wealth in their family than a college-educated black family. And a lot of that has to do with past discrimination with housing, with redlining, and home equity. So we need to look at those and how we can lift these people up. They don't need a handout, they need a hand up. So that's how we can address inequity, is by looking at socioeconomic factors and trying to give them as many opportunities as possible. But reparations is not the way to do that. We need to look at better education opportunities, better home buying opportunities, ways to allow them, and better small business loans, those kinds of ways to increase opportunity and allowing these kind of disenfranchised in the past populations to build up that family wealth that they can pass on to the next generation.
All right, Terry, I'll give you 30 seconds to respond. Again, the question is, do you support the concept of reparations to the descendants of American slaves?
Sean, I don't support the concept of reparations. I think we paid reparations in blood on the field of Gettysburg and Shiloh and others. We've come a long way over the 100 years since the Civil War. We have a long way yet to go. I would endorse some of what Matt said. These are the ways that there are differences. There are inequities, but they're not necessarily systemic. And we can have policies, I don't have the time to go into them here, that can level the playing field to give opportunity to all people.
Jesse Rising?
Yeah, we need to strengthen our economy because, again, a rising tide lifts all boats. And we saw under the previous presidential administration, African Americans had the lowest unemployment rate in our country's history. So we need to implement economic policies that benefit all Americans, minorities and otherwise, to lift everyone up. And again, the concept of reparations, I think, only would perpetuate these divisions that we have in our country right now, because we have to be honest about our country's past, but not perpetuate any divisions going into the future.
And Regan Deary.
I would not be in favor of reparations this time in our history. We are a great country that has an opportunity for all. I agree that we need to be able to support those continued opportunities. When I have been working with low-income families in Decatur, I am finding that they are trying to do better for their families and break down that generational gap. So we've got to do a better job of finding public and private partnerships to be able to support our communities in need, and that gives them the opportunity to find great jobs and reinvest in their community themselves.
Our next question comes from the panel. I turn to Karen Eisert.
Members of the LGBTQI+ community now have the right to get married in every state. That's on account of a Supreme Court decision. But dozens of states and the federal government still have no laws protecting people from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity in housing and public accommodations. So, Regan Deering, would you support or oppose federal legislation prohibiting this sort of discrimination?
Well, we are not in a time in our history that we can accept discrimination on any front. As a Congresswoman, I will continue to lead by example in finding legislation that will make life better for all. We know that when we have marriage that's approved by the Supreme Court, we have opportunities for our married couples to be able to share their resources, share their lifestyle, and find success for them and their families.
Follow up, Matt Hausman, 30 seconds.
I strongly support the rights of the LGBTQ community. Now, whether or not federal legislation is needed for anti-discrimination, I would have to look closer and make sure we're not infringing on things like free exercise of religion. But we need to make sure that hate has no home. We're in the middle of Pride Week, and I want to make sure that all of our LGBTQ community knows that I will strongly support them, even though it might not be popular on my side of the aisle.
And Terry Martin, 30 seconds.
So I have a family member who's a gay person, and I love them dearly. I don't think any Americans, by and large, are looking to have prejudice against their fellow Americans. As far as any, if you want the expression of would I be for something, I'm for open opportunities across the board without discrimination. As far as what the legislation would be, I can't say I would be for or against it until we have something down on paper.
And Jesse Rising.
Of course, we should not be discriminating against anyone in this country. I'm a lawyer and a former clerk for 2 federal judges. And some of these questions are really difficult. As we saw, we had a nominee for the United States Supreme Court who, when asked about standing for someone to bring some sort of a discrimination claim on the basis of whether or not they're a woman, she was not able to define what a woman is. So I don't think we're ready to exactly define what the parameters of these laws would look like as a legal matter.
Candidates, thank you. Panel, any other questions on our minds to ask in the remaining time?
I do. We recently passed a very sad milestone of 1 million Americans who've died from COVID-19. It's the mitigations that some states put in, including Illinois, have been very controversial. I wonder if you can just briefly explain how you view how Illinois approached COVID-19 as compared with other states, and if another wave leads to an increase in cases, would you support reimposing some of those mask requirements, distancing, that sort of thing? And I'll begin at the end of the panel with Regan Deering.
Well, 1 million deaths from COVID is a tragedy all around. We had families that were struggling to find that connection in isolation as we had lockdowns. Clearly, when we started this pandemic, we all were 2 weeks to slow the spread, and we were following the science. As we crossed the $1 million death threshold, we need to continue to take seriously those viruses that are running rampant in our communities. We're going to have spikes and lulls in our COVID-19 viruses as things change. I have a biology degree, so I know what the science is, and I've been able to follow the data that's coming out from our public health departments. And I see a disconnect in the response, especially here in Illinois. Myself, I joined a lawsuit against Governor Pritzker and his unlawful mask mandate for our children in schools. They are not the most vulnerable group, in my opinion, and I knew what my parental rights were, so it felt good to find fellow moms and dads that wanted to be able to advocate for their children. We've seen the devastating effects of remote learning and isolating families from each other during this pandemic. So I do think that as we move forward, we need to continue to embrace reopening our economy, making sure that families are doing what's best for them, and getting on with getting back to life in America.
Matt Hausman, 30 seconds, quickly.
We need to make sure that this is handled at local levels based on caseloads at that level. The heavy-handed mandates and such from the state that's far away, when you have different things that are happening in Cook County and then in downstate, we need to make sure that all the approaches are at a local level. Obviously, I understand the first couple of weeks when we didn't know what was going on, but now as the death rates have gone, we shouldn't look just at caseloads. We need to make sure that we're not shutting down our economy again.
All right, candidates, unfortunately, I'm being told that we are running short on time. Unfortunately, I will not be able to get to Terry Martin and Jesse Rising on that question, but I'm sure you will have something posted to your campaign sites regarding that question. But that is it for the questions. We're not done yet. We're going to turn now to our minute-long closing statements. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order and start with Jesse Rising.
If we don't immediately change the course that our country is on, then we won't recognize it in just a few years. Our economy's on the brink of disaster. Our schools are failing our children. We're facing skyrocketing crime rates. And when I get to Congress, I'll work to strengthen our economy by bringing good-paying jobs back to Central and Southern Illinois, restore American energy independence, and rein in this reckless federal spending that's fueling inflation. I know the value of hard work. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I've had to fight and scrap for everything that I've had, just like every other hardworking American in our district. So the American dream is still alive and well, and it will survive so long as we instill the next generation of Americans with the unwavering conviction that our country carries the promise of a better life. And through that, we can ensure that we protect the American first principles of limited government, free enterprise, personal responsibility, and opportunity for all.
All right, next closing statement with Terry Martin.
Thank you all again for paying attention to tonight's debate here, and we hope you are getting the answers you're looking for. If you want more information about me, again, you can go to my website, terrymartinforcongress.com, or you can also follow me on Facebook for more on the issues at Terry Martin for Congress on Facebook. Look, when I grew up, everyone loved America. The parents in the neighborhood had just been fighting in World War II. It was just a question of often, were you for a union or were you not for a union, or where the level of the minimum wage should be. Today we're faced with much different issues. I sometimes don't recognize the people where they're coming from. You don't know what a woman is anymore. I don't know how to address that. I think we're in a crazy time. I feel like the Twilight Zone. I would ask you for your vote because I'm here for common sense. If you want to send common sense to Congress, where I have been proven to work with others across the aisle repeatedly, then please vote
Matt
for me.
Hausman, your final closing statement, sir.
Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that I've shown that I'm willing to face hard questions and that I might take stands that you don't agree with, but we can disagree and we can do it civilly and we can do it respectfully. And even if we don't agree with each other, I'm still going to work hard for you. I'm going to have a conversation and listen to your input and then take that to Washington, because that kind of respect is the values I learned here in Central Illinois. And we need those values and conservative principles in Washington, because I want to go there, I want to bring people together, not for the special interests, but for you, the American people, the everyday people here in the 13th District. If that sounds good to you, I encourage you to go to hausmanforcongress.com and learn more information. And I hope you'll help join us as we come together and restore the American dream.
And finally, Regan Deering.
If we want to change Washington, we need to change the kind of people that we send there. I am a fighter. I have proven that on my take on the powerful elite of J.B. Pritzker in fighting for our individual freedoms and our American way of life. We clearly need a lot less government in the way. We need to be an America first. When we're talking about energy, we're talking about jobs, we're talking about putting people first. And I have been an educator, a small business owner, and advocating for those less fortunate families in my community, and I want to work for you. We clearly have too many out-of-touch politicians that are political staffers. We have lawyers, we have lobbyists that are way out of touch. We can't even afford to put gas in our own tanks and groceries on the table. So I hope that you will know more about me after tonight. You will continue to join our efforts to put good conservatives back in these seats in Washington and fire Nancy Pelosi once and for all so that we can reclaim our American way of life here in Central Illinois.
Thank you, candidates. That's it for the 13th Congressional District Republican primary debate. We'd like to thank the candidates tonight, Regan Deering, Matt Hausman, Terry Martin, and Jesse Rising. And a big thanks to our journalist panel, WAND News reporter Karen Eisert, Brian Mackey, host of the 21st from Illinois Public Media. Now, don't forget to vote after all this in the primary on June 28th. I'm Sean Streety. For all of us, good night from Illinois Public Media.